subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Mukesh sir, Charmi, it is very insightful to know about the NRI concept under FEMA.
Yes, indeed. I am really enjoying the explanations from Mukesh sir. So simple and lucid, without any jargon. So easy to understand even for a layperson like me.
Absolutely. We'd now be keen to learn about the residential status under the Income Tax Act and the implications of the same.
So Mukesh sir, as you mentioned last time, you are to explain Neel and Riya about the residential status of an NRI under the Income Tax Act. Can you please elaborate?
Surely. Chami, under the provisions of the Income Tax Act, we need to keep in mind that it is the number of days an NRI has stayed in India physically that determines the test of the residential status. Many a times people think that just because they are not an Indian citizen, they are non-resident. Under the Income Tax Act, that is a myth. Citizenship has absolutely nothing to do with your residential status.
Okay.
Now coming to the residential status, there are three broad categories. Firstly, what we call as resident and ordinarily resident, and that is briefly abbreviated as R and OR. The second status is resident but not ordinarily resident, which is R but NOR. And the third is obviously a non-resident. Now you would like to know what are the actual parameters or tests laid down for determining the first status as resident. Now an individual is said to be a resident in India under Section 6 of the Income Tax Act if during the relevant financial year he has physically been in India for 182 days or more, or the second condition is that he has been in India during the relevant financial year for 60 days or more and has also been in India for 365 days or more during the preceding 4 years. So if you fulfill any one of these two conditions, you are said to be a resident. Now keep in mind that these number of days, it need not be at a stretch. In the financial year, during the 365 days, even in broken periods, if you meet with this test of the number of days, you become a resident. In a case where an individual does not fulfill any of these two conditions, then Charmi, obviously, he would be a non-resident.
Okay, but are there any exceptions in the above rules?
Yes, there are. And that is what the NRI should also keep in mind. The two exceptions that are provided, firstly, in a situation where an individual leaves India going outside for purposes of employment, which would also include self-employment. If you are not in a service, it could be that you are going for setting up your own profession, business, etc., which is a self-employment. But if you are going outside India for that purpose and you are an Indian citizen, in that case, the second condition, which is 60 days in that year and 365 days in the preceding 4 years, is to be ignored. Now this is, Charmi, a special relief, because when a person goes outside, you know, for purposes of employment or self-employment, obviously, you know, he would have stayed in India during the preceding 4 years for 365 days or more. And then 60 days is too small a period. So the second condition is not to be looked into, and only the first test of 182 days will apply in case of such an individual. The second exception is made in the case of an individual who is an NRI, you know, Indian citizen or PIO, and who is living outside India, but who comes to India on a break, say a holiday, vacation, or for whatever purpose. But he is actually staying outside India. Now, in such a case also, the first condition, that is 182 days, will apply. The second condition is to be ignored. However, you know, an important amendment came to be made with effect from financial year 2021. And this is, you know, earlier, because of this 182 days, you could come to India and stay here. You know, this was a provision which was being misused by people who had set up, you know, their place somewhere nearby in a tax haven, say Dubai or other places where there is no tax at all. And what they would do is, or where there are lower tax rates, what they would do is they would spend 6 months there, 6 months here, and try to manage their affairs in a way that they maintain the non-resident status to get certain tax benefits.
Okay.
So this amendment came to be made that if in a case the individual has income in India which exceeds rupees 15 lakhs, you know, the terminology used is the income other than foreign sources should not exceed 15 lakhs, which would mean effectively your income in India. If your income in India or income from any business or profession which is controlled from India is more than 15 lakhs, in such a case, instead of 182 days, 120 days test will be applicable with effect from financial year 2021.
Okay.
So what will happen that if you are falling in any of these two exceptions, you know, the definition or the test for the term resident will stand modified to that extent. Chami.
I have a question. While computing the number of days of stay in India, are the days of entering and leaving India also considered?
Very interesting question you have asked, Riya, and the answer is yes. Actually, the moment an NRI enters India, that day, the whole of the day is considered as being in India, and similarly, the day you leave is also treated as your being in India. So, you know, there are people who are very smart and who want to ensure that they can save 2 days. They would, what they would do, Chami, you know, they would take a flight which is just before midnight. Similarly, when they come to India, they would also ensure to see that they come at a time which is beyond midnight, because that helps in saving a full day,
Yes.
you know, when they are here in India.
Okay.
So that is what you need to keep in mind.
You have clarified about resident and non-resident, but can you explain how the third status of resident but not ordinary resident is determined?
Yes. Chami, you know, once you are a resident, you will need to look at the next step and find out whether you are also an ordinarily resident or not. This is determined if the concerned NRI fulfills any one of these two conditions. Firstly, if he has been a non-resident for 9 out of the 10 years preceding the relevant financial year. Or the second condition being, he has physically been in India for less than 730 days during the 7 years preceding the relevant financial year.
Okay.
Now, if any one of these two conditions is also fulfilled, the person will be considered to be R but NOR. Otherwise, he will be a resident, an ordinary resident, what we call as R and OR.
But sir, I have heard that under certain circumstances, an individual is deemed to be R but NOR in India. Is it true?
Yes, Neel. There is a very special status which is a deemed status of R but NOR. And in fact, this came to be introduced with effect from the financial year 2021. And the purpose of bringing in this amendment was, you see, there used to be people who by virtue of their domicile, residence or any other criteria or nature, they would say that, we are not a tax resident of any country, because they would not be paying tax in a tax haven or somewhere where they are having their base. They would be a non-resident in India, and therefore they would say that, we are R but NOR and we will not be required to pay any taxes, even if there is a business or profession which is controlled, from India. Now, in such a case, it is important that they are taxed. And therefore, the criteria that is laid down is that if you have income of more than 15 lakhs, in such a case, you will be deemed to be R but NOR, subject of course to this condition of 15 lakhs of income in India.
Okay. But how is the residential status is important in determining the income tax liability in India for an NRI?
Chami, it needs to be understood that the residential status is the key for determining the tax liability in the case of an NRI, as far as India is concerned. Obviously, if he is a non-resident under the Income Tax Act, by the tests that we saw, in this case, only income earned or accrued in India is liable to be taxed. In other words, the NRI's income outside India is not liable to be taxed at all in India. That's what you have to keep in mind. And that's why people want to be non-residents, because having been NRI outside, they don't want that their foreign income gets taxed under the provisions of the Indian Income Tax Act. Now, in the case of resident but not ordinary resident, now there obviously the Indian income is taxed just as in the case of a non-resident, but as far as income earned outside India is concerned, it would be liable to be taxed in India only if it emanates or results from a business which is controlled in India or a profession which is set up in India. So, Charmi, if it is plain investment income or any other income other than this kind of a business or profession, in case of R but NOR also, there would be no tax liability in India.
Okay.
So, these are the two preferred statuses. Best is be a non-resident or if not, be an R but NOR. Because in the third status, which is resident and ordinarily resident, the world total income of that individual or NRI becomes liable to be taxed in India. So that is the reason why, every NRI should ensure that he does not get into the third status of R but NOR while he is still maintaining, his overall NRI status and is having active sources of earning outside India. So with this background, you need to keep your, tax planning in mind.
Thanks a lot, Mukesh sir. This understanding in relation to the provisions of taxability of an NRI's income was so clear. However, can we come again to meet you to learn about some practical case studies on tax planning for NRIs?
Certainly. Riya, Neel, you're welcome. Chami, let's meet again next time.
Sure.
And we shall discuss practical case studies, which will drive all the points that we have learned today home in a more absorbing and interesting fashion.